They burned the mark into her face while she was still conscious. That is the first thing you need to understand about what was done to Amara Brooks. Not that she was taken, not that she was starved, not that they drained her blood week after week until her veins collapsed, but that they made sure she felt every second of it. They wanted her to remember what she was to them. Property. Inventory. A body with a use. She was 26 years old. She had been 3 semesters away from becoming a surgeon, and on a frozen January night in New York City, inside Grand Central Terminal, her legs finally gave out. She didn't scream when she fell. She had forgotten how. If you've ever loved someone who disappeared and came back unrecognizable, if you've ever looked at a scar on someone's skin and understood without being told what it cost them, then stay with this story. Hit the like button. Drop your city or country in the comments below, because I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because what comes next will not let you go easily. This is part 1. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees by the time Amara Brooks pushed through the service entrance of Grand Central Terminal at midnight. She moved the way people move when they've learned that movement itself is a risk. Small steps, shoulders pulled in, eyes fixed on the floor 12 inches ahead of her feet. She wore a gray janitor's uniform 2 sizes too large, the kind that swallows a body so thoroughly that the person inside it seems to vanish, which was exactly the point. She had been invisible for 8 months. She had worked very hard to stay that way. The wheeled mop bucket she pulled behind her had a broken wheel. It caught on every seam in the marble floor, jerking her arm, making a sound like something dragged against its will. She had reported the broken wheel 3 times. Nobody fixed it. She had stopped reporting it. Her right hand, inside a thin latex glove, was wrapped in gauze underneath. The puncture sites on her inner arm were dressed the same way, covered by the long sleeve of the uniform. She had 3 sites currently active, 2 in the left arm, 1 in the right. They rotated the locations every 10 days so the veins had partial time to recover. Someone had thought carefully about that. Someone had calculated how much they could take before she stopped being useful. She tried not to think about that calculation. She thought about the floor instead. The marble floor of Grand Central at midnight, after the last commuters had gone, was extraordinary in a way she had never permitted herself to appreciate when she was a student moving through this terminal with her backpack and her coffee and her future. Now she mopped it for $4.30 an hour, off the books, paid in cash to a woman named Rita, who collected the envelopes and kept most of it and sent Amara back out every night with enough left over for 1 meal and the subway fare. She wasn't even supposed to be inside the terminal right now. Her assigned section was the lower concourse, the food hall, the bathrooms near track 19. But the mop bucket had caught a crack in the floor near the ramp, and the dirty water had sloshed out across 15 feet of marble, and she'd had to go back to the supply closet on the main concourse level for a second bucket. That was how she ended up in the main hall. That was how she ended up near the clock. The 4-faced opal clock at the center of Grand Central is one of the most recognizable objects in New York City. Amara had read once that it was valued somewhere between $10 and $20 million, though nobody agreed on the exact number. She remembered reading that fact in a magazine in the waiting room of her advisor's office during her second year of medical school, right before a meeting where her advisor told her she had the most disciplined analytical mind he'd seen in a student in 15 years. She remembered being embarrassed by that. She remembered wanting to argue with him. She remembered being 24 and genuinely certain, in the way only 24-year-olds can be, that she had decades of time. The clock read 12:47 a.m. Amara stopped walking. She hadn't planned to stop. Her body simply refused the next step. It was the cold, probably. The cold seeped through the terminal's doors every time they opened, and she had lost enough weight over the last 8 months that her body had no insulation left. Nothing between her skin and the January air but a gray uniform and the memory of a different life. Or maybe it wasn't the cold. Maybe it was the clock. Maybe it was the fact that she was standing in the middle of one of the most beautiful public spaces in the world, mopping marble at 12:47 in the morning, and she had a brand burned into the left side of her face, and nobody in this entire city knew her name. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the handle of the mop bucket. The broken wheel scraped sideways and the bucket tipped, and she went down anyway, one knee hitting the marble hard enough that the crack of it echoed up through the vaulted ceiling. She heard it. She felt nothing. That frightened her more than the pain would have. She tried to stand. Her arms wouldn't cooperate. The left arm, the one with 2 active puncture sites, had gone completely numb below the elbow, and she realized with a distant, almost academic clarity that this had probably been happening for longer than she'd noticed, that she had simply been moving through the numbness the way she moved through everything now, by not acknowledging it until it became impossible to ignore. She made it to one knee. Then the vertigo hit. It came up from the floor, or it felt that way. A slow rotation, the marble tilting, the opal clock swinging on its axis. She had eaten 7 hours ago, half a sandwich, the end of a bag of crackers, water from the bathroom sink. Before that, the previous morning. Before that, she didn't track it anymore. Tracking it required thinking about it, and thinking about it made it harder to keep moving, and keeping moving was the only thing she was permitted to do. She went down all the way. The marble was very cold against her cheek. That was the last clear sensation she registered. The cold of the marble, the way it seemed to pull the heat out of her face through the brand on her skin, the way the clock above her kept its 4 faces pointed in 4 directions regardless of what happened beneath it. She thought, without particular feeling, this is probably it. She closed her eyes. Kong Minja was not supposed to be in Grand Central Terminal at 12:47 in the morning. He was supposed to be in a car on Fifth Avenue, in transit from a meeting in Midtown to a meeting in the financial district, 2 hours behind schedule, because the Midtown meeting had gone sideways in the first 20 minutes and had required 40 more to unsideway. His lead bodyguard, a former South Korean Special Forces soldier named Dae Jung, who had been with him for 11 years, had suggested the terminal as a shortcut, a cut-through to the east side entrance that would save them 12 minutes in traffic. Min-jae had said yes without looking up from his phone. He was 41 years old. He was 6'2", built like someone who had been in fights for most of his life and had won most of them, with hands that had the particular thickness that comes from years of specific use. His face was not handsome in any conventional sense. There was too much scar tissue along the jaw for that, a break in the nose that had been set wrong twice, eyes that processed rooms the way security cameras do, constantly and without warmth. He had 3 tattoos visible above his collar and others that were not. He wore a $12,000 overcoat and moved through public spaces like someone who had never once worried about whether he was allowed to be somewhere. He noticed the woman on the floor before anyone else in his group did. This was not unusual. Min-jae noticed things. It was, along with a complete absence of sentiment when the situation required it, the primary reason he had survived 41 years in a world that had killed men older and more powerful than him. He noticed things other people filtered out, the small movements, the wrong sounds, the presences that didn't fit the pattern of a space. A body on the marble floor of Grand Central at 12:47 in the morning fit the pattern of a space, technically. Bodies appeared in this terminal regularly. Drunks, runaways, people escaping the cold. The security guards managed them with practiced efficiency. What did not fit the pattern was the angle of her fall. He had seen people collapse from drink and from drugs and from exhaustion, and they all fell the same way eventually. Loose, surrendered, the body giving up its tension before the mind quite caught up. This woman had not fallen that way. She had gone down fighting, one hand still wrapped around the mop bucket handle, one knee still partially underneath her like she had tried twice to get back up. She had not surrendered. Her body had simply run out of something it needed and quit without her permission. He stopped walking. Dae-jung, immediately behind him, nearly walked into his back. "Boss, hold!" The other 2 bodyguards flanked out automatically, reading the stillness in Min-jae's posture the way men who have worked close protection for years learn to read it. The terminal was nearly empty at this hour. A handful of transit workers, a few late commuters cutting through. Nobody was looking at the woman on the floor except Min-jae. He crossed to her in 8 strides. He crouched down beside her and did not touch her immediately, which was not instinctive kindness but trained caution. You didn't touch unknown people in unknown situations until you understood the situation. He looked at her. She was young, he registered. Black woman, mid-20s, wearing a uniform that didn't fit her, and she had gone gray around the mouth in the particular way that meant her blood pressure had crashed. Her breathing was shallow enough that from 3 feet away he couldn't see her chest moving, and for one suspended second he thought she was already dead. Then she exhaled. The sound of it was barely a sound. He looked at her arms, at the gauze wrapped around the left forearm, the slight discoloration at the wrist where something had compressed the skin repeatedly. He looked at her right hand where the glove had partially come off in the fall, more gauze visible underneath. Then he looked at her face. Min Jae Kong had been in the Korean underworld since he was 19 years old. He had been running it, in whole or substantial part, since he was 33. He had seen things done to human bodies that he did not allow himself to think about in any depth, because the depth of that thinking led places that were not useful to him. He was not a sentimental man. He was not, by any definition he would have accepted, a gentle one. But he knew that mark. It was burned into the left side of her face, a small symbol, perhaps 2 centimeters across, a circle bisected by 3 lines arranged like spokes. It was old scar tissue, weeks healed at minimum, raised and dark against her skin. A brand. Applied deliberately, with a tool designed for exactly that purpose. He knew that symbol because he had personally ordered the destruction of every record of it 8 years ago. He had believed, had been certain, had staked considerable resources on the certainty that the operation using that mark was finished, dismantled, gone. The coldness that moved through him was not anger. It was something older and quieter than anger, something that lived below the level where anger operated. "Get the car to the 42nd Street entrance," he said. Daejung behind him. "Boss, if she needs medical attention, my physician, not a hospital." He slid one arm under her shoulders, the other under her knees. "Now, Daejung." He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. That was the second thing that hit him. After the mark, after the gauze, after the particular angle of her fall. The fact that she weighed almost nothing, that there was no resistance in her body, that she was so thoroughly depleted that she had become a weight without tension, a person reduced to their minimum. He had carried injured men off floors before. He understood the difference between a body that had been damaged and a body that had been systematically drained. She had been systematically drained. He carried her through the terminal with his coat open around her, his bodyguards clearing the path ahead. Nobody stopped them. Nobody asked questions. People who saw Kong Min-jae moving with purpose through a space understood, without being told, that questions were not welcome. At the 42nd Street exit, the car was already there. He got in the back with her. Daejung took the front passenger seat. The driver, who had been driving Min-jae for 6 years and had learned to ask nothing, pulled into traffic without a word. Min-jae looked down at the woman in his arms. Her head had fallen against his shoulder. The brand on her face was inches from him now, close enough that he could see exactly how it had been applied. Not carelessly, not with rage, but with precision. Someone had taken their time. Someone had wanted it done correctly. His jaw tightened. He had thought about this mark. In the years since he'd ordered the operation dismantled, the way you think about things, you're certain you've buried. Not often, not with fear, but with the occasional distant unease of a man who knows that burial is never quite as final as you need it to be. He had been wrong about the burial. He could see that now, with the evidence pressed against his shoulder. He took out his phone. 3 contacts, no names, just numbers. He dialed the second one. It rang twice. "I need Dr. Han at the penthouse in 40 minutes, he said. "Full kit, blood work, and wake Seo. I want everything we have on a symbol. You remember the one. The circle brand." A pause. "I know what time it is. 40 minutes. He ended the call. The woman against his shoulder made a small sound. Not words, not conscious, just the involuntary sound of a body responding to warmth after a very long time without it. Her right hand, the one with the gauze, twitched once and then went still. Min-jae did not look away from the window. He watched the city move past. The January dark, the lit windows, the yellow spill of streetlights on wet pavement. And he thought about the symbol burned into her face. He thought about who put it there, and when, and what it meant that it still existed. He thought about his father. He hadn't permitted himself to think about his father in 3 years. He thought about him now for exactly 4 seconds, then shut the thought down the way you shut a door on a room you don't enter anymore. But the door had opened, and whatever was on the other side of it was not going to stay there now. Outside the window, New York moved past like it always did, indifferent, enormous, swallowing everything that happened inside it without a pause. The woman against his shoulder breathed shallowly. The car moved north. Min-jae said nothing for the rest of the ride. There was nothing to say yet. But someone, somewhere in this city, had kept that operation alive for 8 years while he believed it was dead. And whatever came next, whatever the blood work showed, whatever CO found, whatever the woman eventually woke up and told him, was going to cost someone everything. He had already decided that. He decided it the moment he saw the brand. Dr. Han arrived in 38 minutes. Min-jae knew this because he had been watching the clock on the penthouse wall since the car pulled into the underground garage. And watching clocks was something he did when he was keeping himself from doing other things, from making calls he wasn't ready to make, from having conversations that needed more information before they could happen, from standing in the hallway outside the guest room where 2 of his household staff were carefully removing a janitor's uniform from an unconscious woman and trying not to look at what was underneath it. He stood at the kitchen island with a glass of water he hadn't touched. Dae-jung was near the elevator, on his phone, running the quiet logistics that followed Min-jae everywhere. The penthouse occupied the entire 43rd floor of a building in Midtown East that officially belonged to a real estate holding company registered in Singapore. Min-jae had lived here for 4 years. He had never brought anyone here who hadn't been vetted to a degree that most government agencies would consider excessive. He brought her here without thinking twice about it. That bothered him slightly. He was a man who thought twice about everything, doctor, and came off the elevator with a hard-sided medical case and the expression of a man who had been doing this long enough that being called at 1 in the morning registered as mild inconvenience rather than emergency. He was 63, Korean-American, had once held a position at Columbia Presbyterian before a series of decisions that Min-jae knew about in detail and had never discussed with him. They had an arrangement that worked because neither of them asked the other questions they didn't want answered. "Room?" Han said. Min-jae pointed down the hall. He waited in the kitchen. 22 minutes passed. Dae-jung finished his call and came to stand near the island, not close enough to crowd, far enough to signal he understood the mood. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York spread itself in every direction. The grid of it, the lit towers, the darkness of the park to the north. 11 degrees, and the city looked exactly like itself, indifferent and permanent. "Seo called back," Dae-jung said. "And? He's running it. Says give him until morning." Min-jae nodded. "The symbol," Dae-jung said, careful. "You recognized it." "Yes." "You want to tell me from where?" Min-jae looked at him. Dae-jung had been with him since before the takeover, had been there the night Min-jae ended his father's control of the organization, had stood in the room and watched, and said nothing, and then driven Min-jae home after and never brought it up again. He was the closest thing Min-jae had to someone he trusted. "Not yet," Min-jae said. Dae-jung nodded. He understood not yet. He had heard it many times. Dr. Han came back down the hall at 2:04 a.m. He set his case on the kitchen counter, clicked it open, and began making notes on a small tablet with the focused efficiency of someone assembling a preliminary report. "She's stable," he said. "For now. But I want to be precise about what stable means in this context. It means she's not dying in the next 6 hours. Beyond that window, I need labs." "What do you have without labs?" Han looked up. "Severe malnutrition. I'm estimating she's lost somewhere between 25 and 30 pounds in the last 4 to 6 months. Her body is consuming itself, muscle mass primarily, which is why she can't hold herself upright. Her arms." He paused. "Whoever has been doing it knew what they were doing. The sites are rotated. They're not amateurs." The silence in the kitchen had weight. "What kind of volume?" Min-jae said. "Based on the vein condition, regular extractions, not massive quantities each time, controlled amounts, frequently. The kind of schedule you'd design if you wanted to keep the source functional indefinitely." Han said this without expression. He had learned not to bring expression to these conversations. "She has an infection developing in the left arm. I've started antibiotics. She needs IV fluids, she needs calories, and she needs about 3 weeks of rest before her body can begin recovering. And there's the brand. I saw it. It's weeks old, healed over cleanly, which means she had basic wound care access at some point. It's..." Han stopped. "It's precise work, specific dimensions, like a registration mark." Min-jae set the water glass down. "I need the blood work. I drew samples. I have a courier coming." "Not the hospital lab." "No," Han said. "My private facility. I'll have results by tomorrow afternoon." He closed the case. "She'll sleep through the night." The sedation I gave her was light. She's mostly just that exhausted. But when she wakes up, she's going to be frightened. I want to be clear about that. Whatever she's been living through, her nervous system has been running on threat response for months. The first thing she'll experience when she's conscious and warm and fed is not relief. It's going to be panic. Whoever's with her when that happens needs to understand that. Minjai looked at him steadily. "I'll be here," he said. Han picked up his case. "She's young," he said, which was not a medical observation. He said it the way a man says something he knows won't change anything, but can't stop himself from saying. "I know," Minjai said. Well, she woke up screaming. Not screaming exactly. The sound that came out of her was not loud enough to be called a scream, which was its own kind of horror, the fact that 8 months had compressed her fear to something that barely had volume. It was more like a sustained exhalation of pure terror, and it lasted approximately 4 seconds before she registered that she was in a bed, in a room, with light coming through a window, and she went completely silent. Minjai was in the chair in the corner. He had been there since 4 in the morning. He had not slept. He was not going to pretend otherwise, and he was not going to move suddenly or speak first, because Han had been right, and he had known Han would be right. The panic was already there in the way she was holding herself, rigid under the blankets, eyes moving across the room with the rapid mechanical quality of someone performing a threat assessment. Her eyes found him. She didn't move. Neither did he. 10 seconds. 15. The city outside the window was starting its gray pre-dawn noise, distant traffic, a siren somewhere below, the low hum of a building that contained 43 floors of human activity even in the dead of night. "You're not going back," Minjai said. Her jaw tightened. "What?" "To wherever they have you. You're not going back." "You don't know where?" "No," he said. "Not yet. But I will." He watched her clock the exits. The door, the window, the distance between her position and his. He stayed in the chair. "You're on the 43rd floor. The window is reinforced. The door isn't locked." She stared at him. "I'm not keeping you here," he said. "If you want to leave, the elevator is at the end of the hall, and the lobby staff will call you a car. I'll give you money. You can walk out in the next 10 minutes if that's what you decide." He held eye contact. "But you collapsed on the floor of Grand Central in 11-degree weather, and you weigh nothing, and there's an infection in your left arm that will reach your bloodstream within the week if you don't finish the antibiotics, so I'd like you to hear me out first." A long pause. She was measuring him. He could see her doing it, running the calculation, looking for the angle, trying to find the thing underneath what he was saying that matched the things people had said to her before. "Who are you?" she said. He told her his name. The way her face changed when he said it told him she recognized it. Not from personal knowledge, from the peripheral awareness that people who live in certain parts of certain cities develop about certain names. Kang Min-jae was not a name on the news. It was a name that moved through conversations in lower registers, in specific contexts. The fact that she'd heard it meant she'd been moving through spaces where it came up. "You're—" She stopped. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then, "So I went from one cage to another." "Look at the door," he said. She looked at it. "It's not locked," he said again. "I don't do cages." "People say a lot of things." "They do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time she got a complete look at him. The scar tissue on the jaw, the hands, the tattoos at his collar, all the evidence of a life that had not been abstract or distant about its violence. "Your name?" She hesitated. "Amara." "Amara. The mark on your face. The circle with 3 spokes." He watched her hand go involuntarily to her cheek, her fingers stopping just before they touched it, a gesture she'd probably made 10,000 times. "I need to know where they took you, what the facility looked like, how many people, how they moved you." Her eyes went flat. "Why?" "Because I shut that operation down 8 years ago," he said, "and someone kept it running, and I want to know who." The silence that followed was different from the one before it. She was processing something, rearranging pieces. 8 years ago," she said slowly. "I believed it was finished. I was wrong." He said it without softening it. "And you are one of the consequences of how wrong I was. I understand if that's not something you want to—" "You knew about it." Her voice had gone very quiet. 8 years ago, you knew it existed. Yes. And you didn't. No one was. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The hand that had been moving toward her face dropped to the blanket and fisted in it. How many people were in there when you supposedly shut it down? He held her gaze. I don't know the exact number. Guess. Amara? Guess. 30, he said. Possibly more. I don't know what happened to them. I was told the operation was dismantled. I did not verify that personally. The sound she made was not a word. It was something below words, something that came from a place in her body that had been keeping score for months. She turned her face toward the window. Her jaw was working. He watched her refuse to cry. Not because she wasn't feeling it, but because she had used up whatever mechanism allows for crying somewhere in the last 8 months and hadn't gotten it back yet. There were 11 people in the room where I was kept, she said finally to the window. When I got there, there were 9 left when they moved me. She paused. I don't know what happened to the other 2. Minjae said nothing. One of them was 19 years old, Amara said. She told me she'd been there for 2 years. The room held that. I'm going to find them, he said. She turned back from the window. You said that like it settles something. It doesn't, but it's what I'm going to do. She studied him for a long time. He let her. She was trying to decide something, and he understood that whatever she decided would be the thing she could live with, and that was the only standard that mattered. The facility, she said finally. It's underground. Lower Manhattan, I think. I was transported in a van without windows, but the sound of it. The trains. The echo pattern through the walls. Her voice had shifted. She was doing something medical with her memory, he realized, treating it like diagnostic data, removing herself from it just enough to be useful. They used a freight entrance. There was a loading dock, 1 level down from the main facility. 3 guards on rotation, 6-hour shifts. She told him for 40 minutes. He did not take notes. He never took notes. He listened with the complete attention of someone whose survival had depended for 20 years on hearing exactly what was said. And she talked with the precise, controlled delivery of someone who had gone through her memories so many times in the dark that she'd organized them into something she could report without shattering. When she finished, she was exhausted. He could see it happen in real time, the animation going out of her, her body remembering it was still in crisis, the weight of what she'd just surfaced pressing back down. Eat something, he said, then sleep. I'm not hungry. Your body is hungry. Your appetite is suppressed. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference. She looked at him sharply. Why do you know that? I had a nutritionist explain it to me once. For different reasons. He stood. I'll have something brought. You don't have to eat all of it. He was at the door when she said, the brand. He stopped. You knew what it meant, she said. The second you saw it. I could tell from the way you went still. Most people look at it and look away. You looked at it like you recognized it. He turned back. What does it mean? She said. The symbol. It's a mark of ownership, he said, used by a specific organization to identify assets they considered long-term resources. He paused. Not victims. That's not the word they used. Resources. She absorbed this without flinching. She had already known it, he thought. She had known it the moment they put it on her. She had just needed to hear it confirmed from outside herself. I'm going to find out who kept it running, he said, and what I do after that, you don't need to know. But the operation ends. That's not a threat. It's a fact. I want to help, she said. No. I know that facility better than anyone you could send. I know their rotation. I know their medical protocols. I know which guards take their breaks where and how long. Amara. His voice was not loud. It was the kind of voice that doesn't need to be. Not yet. She stared at him. Don't manage me. I'm not managing you. I'm telling you that you can't stand up for more than 10 minutes without your blood pressure dropping, and I need you alive long enough to be useful. He held her gaze. Eat, sleep. When Dr. Hahn clears you, we talk about next steps. She didn't like it. He could see she didn't like it. But she was also 20 pounds underweight with an active infection and the sense to know it. Fine, she said, which was not agreement so much as temporary ceasefire. He left her. SEO's report came at 11:47 the following morning. Min-jae read it at the kitchen island with his second coffee going cold beside him, Dae-jung standing near the window, both of them quiet for the duration. The circle had not been dismantled. What Minji had believed was dismantled 8 years ago was a single operational node, one facility, one network of suppliers. The organization itself had fractured, gone lateral, rebuilt under different names and different sectors. Financial records SEO had pulled from a shell company registered in Delaware, traced backward through 4 other entities before arriving at a holding structure that Min-jae recognized. He set the report down. Dae-jung looked at him. "Boss, I see it. That holding structure. I know what it is." Dae-jung was quiet for a moment. "Your father's been gone for 8 years. "He was gone," Min-jae said. "That's different." The financial structure in front of him was one he knew intimately because he had grown up inside it, had learned to read it the way other children learn to read maps, had used it himself for years before the takeover, had believed he'd severed every thread of it when he dismantled his father's direct operations. But you couldn't dismantle a structure you built unless you built the replacement yourself. And Min-jae had been 23 years old when his father taught him this particular architecture, and had not yet understood that understanding a thing and owning a thing were different categories entirely. His father had rebuilt it from wherever he had gone after the takeover, wherever the old chairman had retreated to while Min-jae believed he'd broken him completely. Kang Sung-ho had looked at the ruins of what his son had taken apart and rebuilt it into something quieter and more specific. Not the broad criminal empire of before, something targeted, something that required one particular resource to sustain. Minji thought about the blood work that Han hadn't delivered yet. He thought about Amara's face when she said there were 11 people in the room where they kept her. He thought about his father's hands, large hands, precise hands, the hands of a man who had always understood that the most effective violence was not the loudest kind. "I need to know where he is," he said. "Min-jae." Dae-jung used his name, which he almost never did. "If your father is running this, then he's running it from somewhere. I need to know where." "This is going to Dae-jung." A pause. "Yes, boss." "Find him." Dr. Han's blood work arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Min-jae read the summary in his office with the door closed. He read it twice. Then he sat very still for approximately 90 seconds, which was the longest he permitted himself for any reaction to information he wasn't ready for. Amara Brooks had one of the rarest blood phenotypes in documented medical history. The specific antigen profile Han had identified appeared in fewer than 50 confirmed cases in the medical literature. The majority of them clustered in 2 genetic lines, one East Asian, one West African. The probability of possessing this phenotype without heritage from both lines was, according to Han's attached note, essentially 0. Min-jae pulled up a photograph on his phone. He kept very few photographs. This one was old, scanned from a physical print, the colors slightly wrong in the way of photographs from decades ago. It showed a man in his 50s standing beside a woman who was laughing at something off camera. The man was his great-uncle. The woman, whose name Min-jae had been told once and had not retained because it had not seemed important, was American. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he walked down the hall to Amara's room and knocked. "Come in," she said. Her voice was stronger than the night before. She had eaten. She was sitting up. He came in and closed the door and stood against it because he wasn't sure, for the first time in a long time, where to put himself in a room. "The blood work came back," he said. "And?" he told her. She was quiet for so long that he thought she might not have heard him. Then she said very carefully, "Say that again." He said it again. She looked at her hands. The gauze was still wrapped around the forearms, but she'd changed out of the hospital gown Han had put her in, borrowed clothes from somewhere, oversized, his, probably, folded at the wrists. She looked at her hands like she was seeing them differently than she had an hour ago. "Your great-uncle," she said, "a branch of the family that was removed from the record. Before I was born. My father had a systematic approach to removing things he found inconvenient." He paused. "You're not a random target, Amara. Your blood phenotype is what they've been harvesting. Someone in my family needed it. Someone has been using it to survive," she said flatly. "I know. I'm a medical student. I understand what a rare blood phenotype means to someone with the right condition. She looked up. Your father. He said nothing. He's dying, she said. Whatever he has, and with that phenotype profile, I can make a reasonable guess. He's been using my blood to extend his life. Which means, she stopped. Which means he's the one who took me. Yes. Your father kidnapped me. Yes. She stared at him. He held it. And you didn't know, she said. No. But the organization that took me, she stopped again, reorganized. The organization that took me was built on something you dismantled, something from your world, which means regardless of who specifically ordered it, the infrastructure that made it possible was mine, he said. Yes. The words sat in the room between them. She didn't look away from him. He didn't look away from her. He had spent 20 years dealing in direct terms with what he'd built and what it cost, and he was not going to start being indirect about it now, not with her. I know what you're deciding, he said. Do you? Whether I'm another version of what you've already been through, whether this is a different kind of trap. He straightened off the door. I can't answer that for you. The door isn't locked. That's still true. He set the blood work report on the dresser beside her. But my father is out there, and he will find another source when he finds out you're gone. And whoever that source is will go through exactly what you went through. And you know where the facility is, and I have the resources to end it. And those two things together are worth more than anything either of us can do separately. She picked up the report, looked at it, set it back down. Where is he? She said. Your father. I don't know yet. But you think you can find him? I know I can find him. She was quiet for a moment. The city noise came through the reinforced window, muffled, constant, indifferent. You said the door isn't locked, she said. It isn't. But you need me. Yes. She looked at him with something that was not quite trust and not quite its opposite. Something in between that had no clean name. The thing you feel when you've been lied to so many times that you've stopped categorizing responses as trust or distrust and started categorizing them as useful or not useful. My name, she said. Amara Brooks. I was in my 3rd year at Columbia Medical School. I want you to know that before anything else. I'm not just... She touched the brand on her face without flinching this time. I'm not just this. I know, he said. You didn't know 10 minutes ago. No, he said, but I do now. The afternoon light was going gray in the window. Down the hall, Min-jae's phone lit up on the kitchen island with a message from Dae-jung. 4 words. Found a location. Possible. Min-jae didn't know yet that the location Dae-jung had found was also where Detective James Cole was already waiting, with a phone in his hand and a message half-written to Chairman Kang Sung-ho, reporting that the woman had been found and that the Korean Mafia boss who had her was closer to the truth than anyone had planned. The location Dae-jung found was a parking structure on the western edge of Tribeca. Not the facility itself. Min-jae understood that immediately, the way you understand the difference between a door and a room. It was a contact point, a place where money changed hands, where instructions moved between people who needed to not be seen together in environments that had cameras and witnesses. Dae-jung had gotten the address from a financial thread CO had been pulling since the previous night. A series of cash transfers routed through 3 different accounts before landing in the operating budget of a private security firm that didn't advertise and didn't appear in any business directory Min-jae's people had access to. The security firm's payroll included a name Min-jae recognized. Detective James Cole, 13th Precinct. 11 years on the force, the last 4 of them spent in a unit nominally dedicated to trafficking interdiction. Min-jae looked at that name for a long time. Then he looked at the payroll dates. Cole had been on the security firm's books for 3 years, quiet payments, modest enough to not pattern as extraordinary, consistent enough to constitute a salary. During those 3 years, Cole's unit had conducted 4 major investigations into underground trafficking operations in Lower Manhattan. All 4 had closed without arrests. All 4 had cited insufficient evidence. Min-jae set the file down, picked up his coffee. Set that down too. Where is he now? He said. Dae-jung checked his phone. Parking structure as of 40 minutes ago. He hasn't moved. He's waiting for something. Or someone called him. Min-jae looked at him. The woman, Dae-jung said carefully. When she went missing from their operation, They'd have protocols. Someone would have started looking. And Cole would be their way of knowing where to look, Minjay said. He's a cop, boss. He has access to... I know what he has access to. Minjay was already moving toward the hallway. Get the car. I want Park and Kim, not the full team. Quiet. And Cole? I want him breathing when we're done with him. That's the only condition. They took Cole at 4:17 in the afternoon, in the second level of the parking structure, between a concrete pillar and a gray Honda that hadn't moved in 3 days. It was not complicated. Cole was a large man, 6 feet, heavy through the shoulders, with the particular physical confidence of someone who had spent a career in spaces where size was its own argument. That confidence lasted approximately 4 seconds after he turned around and found Minjay standing 6 feet away with Park and Kim flanking at 45-degree angles. Cole reached for his weapon out of reflex. Park had his wrist before the hand cleared the holster. Kim had the weapon out of it before Cole finished registering what had happened. The whole sequence took less than 2 seconds and generated almost no sound. Cole breathed hard through his nose. You have any idea? Yes, Minjay said. I have a complete idea. Put him in the car. The space they used was not the penthouse. Minjay had 3 properties in the city that served specific purposes, and this was one of the specific ones. A floor of a building in Long Island City that had been a textile warehouse in a previous life and now contained, among other things, a room with no windows and very good soundproofing and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Cole sat in one of the chairs. His hands were zip-tied at the wrist, in front of him, which was a deliberate choice. It looked less extreme than behind the back, and it allowed his hands to be visible, and Minjay found that people revealed more when they could see their own hands. Minjay sat in the other chair, no table between them, 3 feet of bare concrete floor. Detective Cole, he said. Cole was looking at the room, calculating, making assessments. I was good at it, Minjay could tell. His eyes moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years reading environments. He landed on the conclusion the room was designed to produce, that nothing good came out of this space, and that the man across from him knew that better than he did. Whatever you think you have on me, Cole said, you're making a mistake. Tell me about the circle. A pause. Cole's jaw moved. I don't know what that is. Your payroll does. 3 years, James. $4,200 a month. Routed through a private security firm that doesn't exist as a business in any meaningful sense. Minjay leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want to know where the main facility is. I want names. And I want to know who you reported to. Cole looked at him with the expression of a man who had rehearsed for this conversation in abstract and was now discovering the rehearsal was inadequate. I want a lawyer. You're not under arrest. This isn't that kind of conversation. Minjay held the eye contact without effort. I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to think carefully about the fact that the people you work for have no loyalty to you that supersedes their operational security. If they know I have you, and they will know, they will burn everything connected to you without a second thought. Whatever they've promised you, whatever arrangement you believe exists, it ends the moment you become a liability. Cole's breathing had changed. Not dramatically. He was too experienced for dramatic tells, but the rhythm of it had shifted, a half-second longer between inhale and exhale. The facility is in Lower Manhattan, Minjay said. Below street level. Freight entrance, loading dock 1 level down. 3-guard rotation on 6-hour shifts. He watched Cole's face. I already know that much. What I don't have is the specific location and the internal layout below the medical level. You're going to give me that. Cole stared at him. How do you... Because the woman you've been looking for since yesterday told me. She's alive, she's coherent, and she remembers everything. Minjay paused. Which means your operation has already failed. The only question now is what comes next for you specifically. The silence stretched. Cole looked at his hands, then at the floor, then at a point on the wall behind Minjay's shoulder that had nothing on it. Walker Street, Cole said finally. His voice was flat, evacuated of something. There's a building on Walker Street. Looks like a dead restaurant supply warehouse. The entrance is through the loading dock on the north side. Basement level, then sub-basement. That's where they keep... He stopped. His jaw tightened. That's where the medical operation is. Who runs it on the ground? A man named Reeves. He's not... He's not connected the way you're thinking. He's a doctor, disgraced. Lost his license 8 years ago. Cole paused. He's the one who designed the extraction protocol, the rotation schedule, the dosing, the... He stopped again. He designed it to keep them alive, Minjae said. Yes. So they could be used indefinitely. Cole said nothing, which was its own answer. Who do you report to? Minjae said. I reported to a handler. I never had a name. Communication through dead drops. Physical locations, not digital. I'd get instructions. I'd report back through the same system. And above the handler? Cole looked at him. Something in his expression had changed. Not softened, but complicated. Like a man about to say a thing he knows will change the nature of the conversation permanently. I don't know his name, Cole said. I've seen him once. 18 months ago, there was a meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there. I came early. I saw him through a window in the building on Walker Street. He paused. Old Korean man. 70, maybe 75. Small. Moved slow. But everyone in that room, everyone, was watching him like he was the only thing in it. The temperature of Minjae's face did not change. His hands did not move. His breathing did not alter. None of these things were involuntary. They were the product of 20 years of learning to keep his body still when what it wanted to do was something else entirely. Anything else? He said. The words came out level. There were tubes coming from his arm. A portable unit, like a small IV setup, but more complex. One of the medical staff was with him the whole time. Cole looked at his hands again. He looked sick, like something was keeping him going that shouldn't have been enough. Minjae stood up. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on it. The other people in the facility, he said, without turning around. How many currently? Cole was quiet for a moment. 14, maybe 15. They brought in 3 new ones in the last month. A pause. There were more. Some of them didn't. He didn't finish the sentence. Park will get you water, Minjae said. You stay in this room until I say otherwise. He went through the door and closed it behind him. Daijung was in the hallway. He looked at Minjae's face and said nothing for a moment. That was one of the things about Daijung. He understood when the silence was not waiting to be filled. It's him, Minjae said. I heard. 14 people in that facility right now. Minjae was looking at the wall across the corridor, not seeing it. Seeing a man through a window in a building on Walker Street, 70 years old and hooked to a portable medical unit and surrounded by people watching him like he was the only thing in the room. His father, who he had dismantled, who he had been certain he'd broken, who had spent 8 years building something smaller and more specific and more monstrous than anything that had come before. We moved tonight. Daijung made a sound that was not disagreement but was adjacent to it. Say it, Minjae said. If we go in hard, the people inside, I know. The layout of the sub-basement, we don't have that yet. Cole gave us the entrance, but the internal structure. I know. Minjae turned from the wall. Get Amara. A pause. Boss, she knows the internal layout. She lived in it for months. She's the only person I have who can map it from the inside. He moved toward the stairwell. And she said she wanted to help. He didn't bring her to Long Island City. He brought her the maps, paper, because paper left no digital trace, and spread them on the kitchen island of the penthouse. And she sat on a stool across from him with a pencil in her hand and spent 40 minutes drawing from memory. She was good at it. That surprised him, though it shouldn't have. She was a medical student trained in spatial precision, in the kind of detailed observation that most people never develop. She drew the sub-basement level with the confidence of someone transcribing rather than reconstructing, her pencil moving without hesitation, rooms and corridors taking shape in the particular rough shorthand of someone who has mentally mapped an environment for survival. This is the central extraction room, she said, marking a rectangle near the middle of the sub-basement. 8 stations. They're not always full. Sometimes 3 or 4 beds empty at once. Depends on the intake cycle. She drew lines extending from the rectangle. These corridors on either side run to the holding area. That's where they keep people when they're not... She paused. The pencil hovered. When they're not in use. Access points, Minjae said. She marked 2. The freight stairs here, and a secondary exit here. I only know it exists because one of the guards used it at the end of a shift. I don't know where it comes out. Probably street level, north side, Minjae said. Cole confirmed a secondary exit on the north side of the building. She nodded and marked it. Reeves, the doctor. He has an office off the central room. He's usually there during extraction sessions. He monitors everything in real time. We need him alive, Minjae said. He's the only one who knows the medical protocols for detox, for getting the people inside through withdrawal from whatever they've been using to suppress immune response in the donors. She looked up at him sharply. How do you know about the immune suppression protocol? You described the infection pattern to Han. He figured it out. She looked back at the map. Her expression was doing something complicated and she was not letting it finish. There's one more thing, she said. The man who runs it. The one above Reeves, above everyone. She looked at the pencil in her hand. I only saw him once. They brought him in. It was unexpected. The guards got nervous in a way they never usually did. He came into the extraction room and he walked through it like he was inspecting inventory. He stopped at my station. She paused. He looked at me for a long time. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and then he left. What did he look like? Minjae said. She told him. Old, small, moved carefully, like each step was a calculation. Eyes that were entirely awake inside a body that was failing. Minjae put both hands flat on the map. He's my father, he said. Amara's pencil stopped. She looked at him. Kang Sung-ho, Minjae said, former chairman of the organization I now run. I took it from him 8 years ago. I believed he was finished. He looked at the map, not at her. He wasn't finished. He built this instead. Specifically, this, not to rebuild the empire, to survive. He has a condition that requires the phenotype your blood carries. He found out about the bloodline connection, and he designed an entire operation around harvesting from the people who carry it. He paused. You were taken because of genetics I passed on from my family. I took you because of what my blood and yours share. The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at me like I was equipment, Amara said. Yes. And you? She stopped. Reorganized. Her voice was controlled in the way of someone who has learned that controlled is the only viable mode. Your money. Your organization's infrastructure. The financial architecture you built. CO found the holding structure, you said. The one your father rebuilt through. Yes. He rebuilt it using frameworks that came from you, that you taught him, or that he taught you. It doesn't matter which direction. The structure existed because of the organization you run. Minjae said nothing. Which means the money that funded the operation that took me, she set the pencil down. Some portion of it traces back to payments made by people inside your organization, to Cole, to the security firm, to the infrastructure that kept the facility running. She looked at him directly. You funded it, not intentionally, but the money moved through your world to reach his. Yes, he said. The word cost him something. She could see it did. She was not interested in that cost right now. How long have you known? She said. The financial structure since yesterday morning. And you didn't... I told you as soon as I had confirmation that my father was the source, an hour ago. His jaw was tight. I'm not protecting him, Amara. I'm not managing this to protect the organization or myself. I'm telling you the full truth because you deserve it, and because I need you to trust me enough to walk into that building with me. She stood up from the stool. She moved to the window, her arms crossed over her chest, looking at the city. Her left forearm was still bandaged. She was wearing borrowed clothes that were too big, standing in a penthouse she hadn't chosen, looking at a city that had swallowed her for 8 months. You need me to trust you, she said. I need us both to walk out of that building, he said. What that requires is up to you. She was quiet for a minute. The afternoon light shifted perceptibly. Then, tonight is too soon. The longer we wait, I know. She turned from the window. I know. But if your father knows Cole has been taken, and he will know. He'll move the operation. He's done it before. I remember being moved once, a different location, everything packed and relocated in less than 6 hours. She came back to the island and looked at the map. We have one chance at this. We don't go in half ready. He looked at her. Tomorrow, she said. Give Seo tonight to confirm the secondary exit. Give Han tonight to give me something I can actually function on. She put her finger on the map, on the rectangle she'd marked as the extraction room. And I go in with you, not waiting in a car. Not watching on cameras. I go in. That's not non-negotiable, she said. Those are my people in there. I know their names, some of them. I know which ones can walk and which ones can't, and which ones are going to need someone to tell them it's over because they stopped believing it could be. She looked up at him. You need me functional on the inside, that's the deal. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the map, then back at her. He was about to speak when his phone lit up on the counter beside the map. He looked at the screen. Daejung. One line of text, no preamble. Cole is gone. Room is empty. He was wrong about the zip ties. Min-jae picked up the phone, read it again. Cole was gone. Cole, who knew they were moving on Walker Street, who knew they had Amara, who had a handler somewhere in the city, and a dead drop system that didn't require a phone and could be activated with nothing more than a mark on a wall in the right location. Cole, who had 40 minutes of head start. Min-jae looked at Amara across the map of the facility where 14 people were currently being held. We move now, he said. Her face changed. Not with fear. With something harder than fear. The expression of someone who has just watched the last margin of safety close and has decided, in real time, that closed margins are something she knows how to work inside. She picked up the pencil. Then let me finish the map, she said. They finished the map in 11 minutes. Amara drew fast. Not rushing, just economical. The pencil moving with the kind of precision that comes from having mentally traced the same corridors so many times in the dark that they exist in the body as much as the mind. She marked guard positions, sight lines. The location of the medical supply cabinet she knew was unlocked on the east wall of the extraction room. The distance between the freight stairs and the first holding area and steps, because steps were more reliable than estimates. Min-jae photographed every page with his phone, sent them to Daejung, sent them to Seo. Then he looked at Amara and said, body armor. She blinked. What? I have vests. You're wearing one. I'm not non-negotiable, he said, using her own word from 20 minutes ago. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away first, which was not surrender but pragmatism, the calculation of someone who understood that this was not the argument worth having right now. Fine. They were moving in 40 minutes. Walker Street at 11 at night looked exactly like nothing. That was the design of it. The building sat between a legitimate freight operation on one side and a vacant commercial space on the other, and it had the particular blankness of a structure that had learned to disappear. No signage. 2 loading bays on the street level, both shuttered, the metal doors weathered in a way that suggested disuse. A camera above the north bay, positioned to look broken. Min-jae clocked it immediately. The camera is live, he said into the earpiece. Daejung, positioned half a block east with 2 of their people. We see it. Seo has the feed. 30-second loop running now. How long has the loop been up? 40 seconds. Move. They moved in 2 groups, Min-jae and Amara through the north bay, Park and Kim through the secondary exit on the building's west side that Seo had confirmed from city infrastructure records. 4 people total. Min-jae had wanted more. Amara had argued against it. Too many bodies in a confined underground space created chaos that hurt the people they were trying to extract, and she was right, and he hated that she was right, because more bodies meant more margin, and he preferred margin. The loading dock door opened with a keycard Seo had cloned from the security firm's access records. It made no sound. Beyond it, concrete stairs going down, single bulb at the landing, the smell of industrial cleaning fluid, and something underneath it that Min-jae's body recognized before his mind named it. Disinfectant over blood. The particular combination of a medical space that cleaned aggressively because what it was cleaning was specific and recurring. Amara was behind him on the stairs, close enough that he could hear her breathing. It had changed the moment the door opened. Not faster, but more deliberate, each breath taken like a decision. She knew this smell. She had lived inside it for months. He felt her hand touch his shoulder once. Not grabbing, just contact, just placement. And then she moved up beside him at the landing and pointed left. He went left. The first guard was exactly where she'd said he'd be. The encounter lasted 5 seconds. Park materialized from the west exit corridor at the same moment. Min-jae came around the corner from the landing, and the guard, Young, not expecting approach from two directions simultaneously, made the wrong choice between reaching for his radio and reaching for his weapon and managed neither before Park had him down and zip-tied with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this more than professionally. Min-jae checked his watch. They had the 30-second camera loop on a cycle. Seo could extend it, but every extension increased the risk of detection by whatever monitoring system the facility ran internally. "Second guard," he said quietly. Amara touched his arm, pointed at the corridor ahead, a junction, left toward the extraction room, right toward a door she indicated with two fingers. "Break room," she mouthed. "Shift change at midnight." He checked his watch again. 11:47. 13 minutes, he said. She nodded. They went left. The extraction room was lit the way hospital spaces are lit, fluorescent, total, the kind of light that eliminates shadow, because shadows allow for the kind of privacy that medical procedures are not supposed to accommodate. 8 stations, as Amara had drawn them. 6 currently occupied. Min-jae saw them and felt something locked down in his chest. Not emotion exactly, not the way he understood emotion, but a physical response to information, the body processing what the mind was still cataloging. 6 people on gurneys, various states of consciousness, various stages of whatever the extraction cycle currently was. Ages ranged. He put the youngest at barely 20, the oldest at perhaps 45. All with the particular depletion that Amara carried when he first saw her, the absence of reserve. Amara made a sound beside him. It was very small. She stopped it immediately, pressed her fist briefly against her mouth, and then she was moving across the room to the nearest station, her hands on the arm of the person there, before Min-jae had processed that she'd moved. "Hey," she said softly, to the woman on the gurney. "Hey, look at me. I'm Amara. I was here. I got out. Out. Do you understand me? Look at my face." The woman on the gurney looked at her. Her eyes took a moment to focus. They had the particular lag of someone whose blood volume was below operational level. Then she looked at Amara's face, at the brand on her cheek. Something in her expression shifted. "We're leaving," Amara said. "All of us. Right now. Can you sit up?" Min-jae was at the east wall cabinet, the one Amara had marked on the map, the one she'd said was unlocked. It was unlocked. Inside, IV supplies, tubing, a rack of saline bags, medications in labeled drawers. He found what he needed, brought it back. Amara had already disconnected the first woman from the extraction equipment with the efficiency of someone who understood the machinery from the inside out. The door to the office off the central room opened. Reeves was a tall man, thin in the particular way of people who stand for long hours over decades. Posture compensated, shoulders rounding forward. He was perhaps 55, with a face that had been ordinary once and had gone somewhere else since. He stood in the doorway holding a tablet, wearing a white coat over a dress shirt, and he looked at Min-jae and Amara and the disconnected equipment and did the math in approximately 2 seconds. He turned to run back into the office. Kim came through the office door from the secondary corridor on the other side before Reeves made it halfway across the room. The collision was not violent. Kim simply stepped into his path and stopped him. The way a wall stops motion, one hand gripping his collar, walking him backward into the main room. Reeves looked at Amara. His face did something complicated. Recognition, Min-jae clocked, and something beneath recognition that was harder to name. "You left," Reeves said. Not accusatory, almost wondering. "I fell," Amara said. "There's a difference." She did not look at him for more than a second. She was already moving to the next station, her hands working efficiently, her attention on the person in front of her rather than the man behind her. "Sit him down somewhere and make sure he doesn't have a radio." Kim sat Reeves down and confirmed he didn't have a radio. He had a phone. Kim removed it. Min-jae moved through the room, keeping visual on the corridor toward the break room. 11:52, 5 minutes. Park came through the freight corridor. "West holding area is clear. 8 people, some mobile, some not. I've got them moving toward the freight stairs." "Steady pace," Min-jae said. "No running, no noise. Get them to the street level and hold there." "The van's in position?" Amara said, without looking up from what she was doing. 2 blocks north, Min-jae confirmed. Seo's driving. She was working on the 3rd station now, talking quietly to the person there. A man, perhaps 30, who had gone very still and was staring at Minjae with the wariness of someone who had learned that men in this space were a specific category of threat. "He's with me," Amara said to the man, not breaking the rhythm of her hands. "He's who got me out. Focus on me." The man focused on her. Minjae checked the corridor. 11:56. "Reeves," he said. The doctor looked at him from where Kim had parked him against the wall. "The other victims," Minjae said. "Beyond this room and the West holding area. Are there others in this building?" Reeves said nothing. "I'm going to find them either way," Minjae said. "The question is how much time we have before your employer knows this facility has been breached and what that time costs the people still inside." A pause. Reeves looked at the floor. "There's a second holding area, sub-basement 2, below this level. Stairs are behind the supply cabinet on the north wall." Minjae looked at the north wall. Behind the supply cabinet, which was on wheels, he could see now, designed to move. He moved it himself. Found the door. Looked at Kim. "Stay with him," he said. To Park, through the earpiece. "I need you back inside, second sub-basement level." "Copy." He looked at Amara. She had finished the last station in the main room and was helping the person there, an older woman, moving slowly, toward the freight stairs. She looked back at him over her shoulder and read his face. "How many more?" she said. "Unknown. Second level below this one." Her expression didn't change. "Go. I'll get these 6 to the stairs and come back." "Amara, go," she said. He went. The second sub-basement was where the people who had stopped being useful were kept. Minjae understood this the moment he got the door open and the light hit the space. Not a medical space. No equipment, no stations, no clinical furniture. A storage room repurposed, with cots against the walls and a water source and nothing else. The people here were in worse condition than the ones above. Some were sleeping. 2 were not conscious in a way that read as sleep. Park was beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Minjae moved into the room and started working through it the way you work through something when there is no useful reaction to it. Systematically, one person at a time, assessing mobility and consciousness and immediate medical need. He counted 7. One of them was very young. He looked at her and thought about Amara's voice saying she was 19 years old and had been here for 2 years, and made himself stop thinking about it, because thinking about it right now served no one in this room. His phone vibrated. Daijung, outside. Movement on the block. Dark SUV, East End, sitting. Minjae looked at Park. "How fast can we move 7 people up 2 levels?" he said. Park looked at the room. 10 minutes if 2 of them need carrying. We have less than that. His phone again. Daijung, SUV is moving, coming to the building. Cole had made his call. 42 minutes, roughly, from the time he'd cleared the room in Long Island City. Enough time to get to a dead drop, leave a message, get a response, and have a response team deployed. Minjae had calculated they had 40 minutes from the moment Cole escaped. He'd been right. "Move them," he said to Park. "Now. All of them. Whatever it takes." He went back up to the first sub-basement level. Amara was there. She had come back, as she said she would, and she was helping Reeves, who had apparently decided that cooperation was his best available option, carry one of the extraction room patients who couldn't walk on their own toward the freight stairs. The sight of it, Reeves doing this, directed by the woman whose blood he had systematically harvested, was something Minjae looked at for 1 second and then filed away for a later he didn't currently have. "Vehicle outside," he said. She looked at him. Understood immediately. "How many upstairs?" she said. "Park is moving 7 from the lower level. The ones from this room are already up?" "Most." She handed off her end of the patient to Reeves without ceremony. 2 still in the freight corridor. "Get to the street. Stay behind the van." "What are you—" "Go, Amara." She looked at him for 1 second, then she went. They came through the North Bay door, 4 of them, and Cole was one of them. Minjae saw Cole's face in the freight corridor and felt something click into place that had been slightly misaligned since the room in Long Island City, the specific satisfaction of a calculation confirming itself. Cole was alive and moving fast and had a weapon already out, and behind him were 3 men Minjae didn't recognize who moved with the particular economy of people for whom violence was professional rather than situational. The corridor was narrow. That was the geometry of it. A narrow freight corridor with one light, which Min-jae put out with a single shot before they had eyes on him. And then it was a close quarters problem in the dark. And close quarters in the dark was a different category of problem than open space engagement. What followed was not cinematic. It was close and ugly, and it cost Min-jae a hit along the left side that he registered as pressure rather than pain because adrenaline was handling his pain processing for him right now. He stayed moving. That was the fundamental principle. In a close fight, you do not stop moving, you accept impact, and you keep moving, and you find the geometry of the space that gives you angles on the other side. He found it. 2 of the 3 went down in the corridor, not dead, functionally removed from the problem. The 3rd went through the stairwell door, and Min-jae followed, and they resolved that in the stairwell, which was even narrower, which made it faster. Cole was at the loading dock level when Min-jae came out of the stairwell. He had the bay door half open, the north bay, the way out. And he looked back and saw Min-jae and did the calculation visible on his face. The 3-step sequence of a man deciding whether to run or fight and landing on fight because he had nowhere to run that wasn't worse. He raised the weapon. Min-jae was already moving sideways. The shot hit concrete. Cole fired again and Min-jae felt this one. Upper arm, left side. A tearing that registered as fire, now because the adrenaline had its limit and he'd pushed past it. He went down to one knee, came back up. The knee hit the concrete wrong and sent something electric up through his hip, but he was upright. Cole was looking at him, breathing hard, reassessing. "You're going to bleed out," Cole said. "Eventually," Min-jae said. "Not tonight." Cole moved to fire again and then stopped, because Dae-jung was behind him. Cole hadn't heard him come through the bay door. Dae-jung moved with the particular silence of someone who had done this for 20 years and understood that the most effective approach was the one nobody heard coming. Cole looked at Dae-jung, looked at the weapon against the back of his neck, looked at Min-jae. He put his weapon on the ground. Min-jae breathed. He put his hand against the wall and breathed and let his body report back to him. The hit on the left side, bruised ribs at minimum, possibly one cracked. The arm, which was bleeding properly now, soaking through his sleeve in the specific way of a wound that needed pressure and would need more than pressure soon. His hip, where the knee had hit the concrete, which was going to make walking interesting. He was still upright. "Zip tie him," he said to Dae-jung. "Both wrists, both ankles, and this time check every seam." He came through the north bay door into the cold. The street was controlled chaos. Seo had pulled the van to the building entrance, and people were being moved into it, park directing from the freight door, the loading managed with the kind of organized urgency that looks messy from outside and has a logic inside it. Amara was at the van's rear doors, helping people in, speaking quietly to each one, her hand on an arm, her voice low and continuous. She looked up when Min-jae came through the door. She looked at his arm, at the way he was moving. She was across the distance between them in 12 steps. She grabbed his arm without preamble, turned it toward the available light, looked at the wound with the focused assessment of a medical student who had spent 8 months in proximity to blood and had learned to not be managed by the sight of it. "Through and through?" she said. "I think so." "You think?" "It feels like it." She was already pulling the first aid kit from the van's interior with her free hand, tearing it open, applying pressure with the practiced compression of someone who'd done it before. He let her. The cold was helping with the arm. He could feel it less, which was not medically ideal but was functionally useful right now. "The people," he said. 14 from the facility. Park is still bringing up the last 2 from the lower level." Her hands didn't stop. "We need to go before whoever sent Cole sends a second wave. We're going." She looked up at him. Close, in the dark, in the cold, with blood on both of their hands. Hers from helping with the patients, his from the corridor. Her face was doing what it had been doing since the moment they came through the loading dock door. Not fear, not exactly, but something that existed in the same register as fear and had been converted to function rather than paralysis. "Are you actually going to be able to drive?" she said. "Dae-jung's driving." "Are you actually going to stay conscious?" He looked at her. "Are you asking as a medical professional?" "I'm asking as the person who has to tell you if the answer is no." He held her gaze. "I'm conscious," he said. "I'll stay that way long enough." She held his gaze for 1 second more. Then she tied off the compression wrap with a sharp, efficient pull that communicated something she wasn't putting into words, and she went back to the van doors. Park came through the freight exit with the last two people from the lower level. Everyone accounted for. 14 people from the facility, plus Reeves, who had been walked out under Kim's direction and was sitting on the curb looking at the ground with the expression of a man whose calculation about the future had recently and significantly changed. Min Jae's phone went off. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. 3 words in the message, "I know you're there." And then a second message from the same number, arriving 4 seconds later. "Bring her to me. We discuss terms. Or I come to you, and there are no terms." Min Jae stood in the cold outside the building on Walker Street with blood soaking through the compression wrap on his arm and 14 people being loaded into a van behind him, and he looked at those 2 messages for a long time. His father. Sung-ho had a phone after all. Or he had someone who had a phone and was willing to use it, which was the same thing. And he knew, had known. Min Jae understood now, probably since Cole's message arrived, exactly what had happened inside the building on Walker Street. He knew his son had taken the facility. He knew Amara was free. He knew the operation was gone, and he was still negotiating, which meant he was not finished, which meant there was still something he held that he believed was worth trading. Min Jae typed one word back, "Where?" The response was immediate, as if Sung-ho, or whoever held the phone for him, had been waiting with their finger over the screen. "The Iron Vault. You know where that is. Come alone. Bring the girl. 2 hours." Min Jae did know where the Iron Vault was. He knew where it was because his father had built it, and Min Jae had learned about it at 20 years old as one of the family's most protected assets. And he had never gone there after the takeover because going there would have confirmed that his father had not fully surrendered that ground. And there were things Min Jae had preferred, for 8 years, not to confirm. He put the phone in his pocket. He turned around. Amara was looking at him from the van doors. She had read his face the way she'd been reading it since the kitchen in the penthouse. Not perfectly, not with everything, but enough. "What?" she said. "My father just messaged me," Min Jae said. "He wants to negotiate." She stared at him. "He wants you brought to him in exchange for terms." The cold between them had sound in it, traffic somewhere, a distant siren, the low mechanical hum of the city that never fully quieted. "And," she said, "and I'm going," he said, "but not the way he's expecting." Her eyes stayed on him. "What does that mean?" He looked at his arm, at the compression wrap she'd tied off efficiently in the dark, at his own blood soaking through it at a rate that meant the next 2 hours were going to require a decision about whether he was going to function or was going to acknowledge what the arm actually needed. He had already made that decision. He was going to function. "It means I need Han at the Iron Vault location in 90 minutes, he said, to Dae-jung, who had materialized at his shoulder with the quiet consistency of someone who understood that his job was to be present at exactly these moments. "And I need CO running financial access to every account connected to Sung-ho's operation. I want them frozen before we walk in." He looked at Amara. "And I need you to understand that what I'm about to do is going to end it, all of it. But it requires me to give him something he thinks he wants." She looked at him steadily. "Yourself," she said. He said nothing. "You're going to offer yourself," she said. "Your blood, your phenotype. You're going to walk in there and offer to let him take from you what he's been taking from me." The van engine started behind her. Park had the last people loaded. 14 people, alive, extracted, moving north toward the addresses CO had arranged. Safe houses, medical contacts, people who would ask no questions and provide what was needed. Amara Brooks stood in the cold outside Walker Street and looked at the man who had carried her off the floor of Grand Central Terminal and looked at the brand on her face like he recognized it, and her expression was the most complicated thing Min Jae had seen on a human face in recent memory. Anger and understanding and something that was not quite gratitude and not quite its opposite but lived in between. "You're going to let him transfuse you," she said, "aren't you?" And Min Jae looked at her and said nothing, because she already knew, and the van was waiting, and the Iron Vault was 40 minutes across the city, and his father was sitting somewhere inside it believing that he still had something left to negotiate with. And Min Jae had already decided, in the 4 seconds between the first message and the second, exactly what he was going to put inside his own bloodstream before he walked through that door. Han arrived at the Iron Vault staging point at 12:41 in the morning. He found Minji sitting on the floor of the van with his back against the wheel well, and his left arm extended across his knee, the compression wrap removed, the wound open to the interior van light. Han looked at it the way he looked at everything, without drama, with complete professional attention, and said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Through and through, Min-jae said. I see that. Han set his case open beside him and began working. The good news is you're right. The bad news is through and through in the upper arm still means you've lost more blood than is useful before doing whatever you're planning to do next. He cleaned the entry point with the focused efficiency of a man who had done this in worse conditions, which I assume is something I wouldn't advise. I need one more thing from you before we go in, Min-jae said. Han looked at him. Anticoagulant, high dose. Something that moves fast once it's in the bloodstream. He watched Han's face process this. And something that won't kill me if it's administered in the next 2 hours. Han was quiet for a moment. You want to be walking when you go in there, yes. And you want whatever is in your bloodstream to be lethal to someone else who receives it. I want it to be effective, Min-jae said. Lethal is between the medication and his condition. Han looked at him for a long count. Then he looked at the case. He was quiet in the particular way of someone who had maintained a specific moral position for a very long time, and was in the process of revising it in real time based on information the original position hadn't accounted for. His condition, Han said, the blood phenotype. If he has what I think he has, the disorder that creates the dependency on the specific antigens in that profile, then a high-dose anticoagulant introduced through transfusion would, yes, Min-jae said. It would not be fast, Han said. It would not be painless. I know. Another silence. I need to know, Han said carefully, that the 14 people your people extracted from Walker Street are receiving medical care right now. CO has them. 2 of your colleagues, people I've used before. They know what they're treating. Han nodded once, looked at his case again, made a decision the way a man makes a decision when all the available options are bad, and one of them is slightly less bad than the others. He opened a secondary compartment in the case. The suturing first, he said. Then we discuss dosing. Amara watched this from the front passenger seat, turned sideways, her back against the door. She had not been invited into the conversation and had not inserted herself into it. She was a medical student. She understood the pharmacology being discussed. She also understood that understanding it and being inside it were different categories, and that right now she was inside it in a way that had no clinical distance available. She had been inside it since the moment Min-jae said what he was going to do. She had not tried to talk him out of it. This was not because she had no argument against it. She had several, and they were medically sound. It was because she had looked at his face when he said it and understood that the decision had been made before he voiced it, that voicing it was not deliberation but disclosure, and that she was the only person he had disclosed it to before the van door closed and they drove 40 minutes across the city. She thought about that while Han worked on Min-jae's arm. She thought about the fact that Kong Min-jae had carried her off the floor of Grand Central Terminal and taken her to his home and told her things he didn't have to tell her, and then spent 2 days making choices that cost him something visible, and that none of this made him uncomplicated or absolved him of anything, and that the complicated version of a person doing the right thing was not the same as a simple person doing it, and that it mattered more, not less. She thought about the brand on her face. She thought about the woman on the gurney in the extraction room who had looked at it and felt something shift in her expression. Recognition, she now understood. Not recognition of Amara specifically, recognition of what the brand meant, that someone who wore it had gotten out. She turned back to face forward and looked through the van's windshield at the street. The Iron Vault was a building that had been a private bank in the 1920s, then a law firm, then a series of increasingly opaque private holding entities. It sat on a block in Lower Manhattan that had been redeveloped around it twice without touching it, because the entities that owned it had the kind of lawyers who made redevelopment impractical. It did not look significant from the street. That was its primary security feature, the complete absence of any visual signal that it mattered. Dae-jung was beside her in the driver's seat. He had said very little for the last 30 minutes, which she had initially interpreted as tactical focus, but was beginning to understand was something else. She looked at him. "How long have you worked for him?" she said. He glanced at her briefly. 11 years? Were you there when he took over from his father? A pause. Yes. What happened?
Daijung looked at the street ahead. That's not my story to tell. She looked back at the windshield. He's going to walk in there knowing his father might kill him.
Min-jae has walked into rooms knowing that before. That's not an answer. No, Daejung said. It's not. He was quiet for a moment. He's been waiting for this for 8 years, whether he admitted it or not. You can't dismantle someone's empire and believe they've accepted it. At some level, he's always known his father was still out there, still building. He paused. He just didn't know what the building was for. The van door opened and Min-jae climbed back in. His left arm was sutured and wrapped, and he moved it with the careful economy of someone managing functional pain rather than debilitating pain. He sat across from Amara and looked at her. You're not going in, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her, reassessing. He had expected an argument. I'm the thing he wants, she said. If I'm not there, you have leverage. If I'm there, he has it. She held his gaze. So I'm not going in. I'll be at the secondary entrance with Dae-jung. If you're not out in 40 minutes, we come in. Min-jae nodded. I need you to come out, she said. The sentence came out more direct than she'd intended, stripped of whatever framing she'd been reaching for. She let it stand. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. He went in alone. The Iron Vault's main entrance was unlocked, which told Min-jae that his father's people had been there recently, had prepared the space, had made the calculation that locked doors were irrelevant at this stage of the negotiation. He went through the lobby, marble, dark, the particular smell of a space that had been closed for years and recently reopened, and took the stairs down one level to the vault room. His father was in the vault room. Kang Sung-ho was seated in a chair that had been brought in specifically for him, the kind of chair that exists to make sitting look like a choice rather than a necessity, high-backed, solid, positioned in the center of the room with the particular deliberateness of a man who understood staging. He was smaller than Min-jae remembered. 8 years had taken something from his physical presence. The size he'd carried in Min-jae's memory was partly constructed from the accumulated weight of fear, and fear had a way of adding mass to the people who generated it. Without it, Sung-ho looked like an old man, 73, perhaps 74. White-haired, dressed in a suit that was slightly too large for him now, his hands in his lap with the stillness of hands that had learned to conserve motion. To his right, a medical attendant stood with a portable transfusion unit. Compact, professional, the kind of equipment that moved because it had been designed to move. To his left, 2 men, security. Min-jae assessed them in 2 seconds. Competent, not exceptional. The kind of security you employed when your primary protection was your opponent not wanting to kill you. Sung-ho looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at Sung-ho. 8 years. 8 years since the night that had ended his father's control of everything, that had required Min-jae to do things he was not going to revisit now in this room, that he had built the last decade of his life on top of like you build on a foundation you've stopped examining. 8 years and his father was still alive, which Min-jae had known intellectually and was now processing physically, in the specific way of a body confronting information it has been keeping at cognitive distance for a very long time. You came alone, Sung-ho said. His voice was thinner than Min-jae remembered. The same cadence, precise, metered, the voice of a man who had learned that volume was for people who hadn't already established authority, but the breath behind it was shorter. The condition was doing what conditions did. You asked me to, Min-jae said. I also asked you to bring the woman. I heard you. Sung-ho looked at him. His eyes were entirely intact. Whatever his body was losing, his eyes had refused to participate in the decline. They were the eyes Min-jae had grown up with, the eyes he had spent 2 decades learning to read and then learning to stop needing to read. You've taken my facility, Sung-ho said. No particular emotion in it, statement of fact. Yes. The people inside. Gone. The doctor. Also gone. Min-jae moved 3 steps closer and stopped. It's finished, Father. The operation is finished. Every financial structure you used, CO is freezing the accounts tonight. There's nothing left to rebuild. Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. You're very thorough, he said. You were always thorough. I gave you that. A pause. What I didn't give you was the understanding of why the operation was necessary. I understand why it was necessary to you. Do you? Sung-ho's hands moved slightly in his lap. Not nervousness, just the involuntary motion of a body managing pain. I'm dying, Minjae. I have been dying for 4 years. The blood treatments, they bought me time. Time to see this through. To see what through? This. His eyes moved to indicate the room, the city, the organization outside the room that had been his before it was Minjae's. To see whether you built something worth inheriting back. Minjae looked at him. You took what I built, Sung-ho said. I wanted to see if you could sustain it, if you were capable of the thing you claimed when you took it. He paused. 8 years. You've run it for 8 years. And you haven't destroyed it yet. I'm not maintaining it, Minjae said. I'm ending it. The criminal enterprise. I've been transitioning the assets for the last 3 years. Legitimate business. It'll take another 4 or 5 years to complete, but I know, Sung-ho said. Minjae stopped. I've been watching, Sung-ho said simply. The transition, the legitimate holdings, the foundation work you've been doing quietly. He paused. I didn't build an empire so my son could dismantle it, but I watched you do it, and I understood something I hadn't expected to understand. His breathing was becoming visible now, the chest working harder than the conversation required, the body spending reserves it didn't have. That you were doing what I should have done, what I was never capable of doing. The room was very quiet. This is not, Minjae said carefully, a conversation that changes what I came here to do. I know that too. Sung-ho looked at the medical attendant. I asked you here to negotiate. There is no negotiation. I understood that before I sent the message, but I wanted to see you. Minjae stood in the vault room of the iron vault with his sutured arm and his medicated bloodstream and his father's eyes on him and said nothing for a long moment. 14 people, he said finally, in that facility. One of them had been there for 2 years. She was 19 when they took her. Sung-ho said nothing. The woman whose blood you took specifically, she was a medical student. 3 semesters from finishing, you branded her face. The branding was Reeves's protocol, Sung-ho said. I didn't order it. You didn't stop it. Sung-ho held his gaze. No, I didn't stop it. The honesty of it was almost worse than denial would have been. Minjae had come prepared for the version of his father that deflected and maneuvered. This version, which was perhaps what 8 years of dying did to a man who had spent his life maneuvering, was harder to hold at the necessary distance. I need your blood, Sung-ho said. Whatever you've decided. I know you've come here with something in it. I know how you think. I taught you to think this way. But my body is failing in a manner that is not abstract or distant. I have perhaps 4 to 6 weeks without treatment. He looked at his son across the room. If you've come here to end it, then end it. But I want you to look at me while you do. Minjae crossed the rest of the distance between them. He stopped in front of his father's chair and looked down at him, at the white hair, the too large suit, the hands that had been large once and were large still but carried nothing now, no authority except the kind that comes from age and the proximity of an ending. He held out his arm. Sung-ho looked at it. You're not a doctor, Sung-ho said. No, but I know how the equipment works. And you need this done before whatever's keeping you functional tonight stops working. He held the arm steady. Your attendant can step out. Sung-ho looked at the attendant. The attendant looked at Minjae with the expression of a person running a threat calculation. Then he looked at Sung-ho. Sung-ho nodded. The attendant left. The 2 security men looked at Sung-ho. He dismissed them with the same gesture. They left. The vault room door closed. Minjae and his father were alone. Sung-ho set up the transfusion connection himself. His hands still precise, even diminished, the muscle memory of months doing this in controlled settings. Minjae watched him work and let him work. When the connection was made, Sung-ho looked up. Whatever you've put in your blood, he said. Yes, Minjae said. Sung-ho held his gaze for a moment. Did it hurt? Making that decision. Minjae thought about it. No, he said. Which was true and was not the whole truth, and he suspected his father knew the difference and was not going to press it. Sung-ho opened the valve. What happened next was not dramatic. It was almost quiet. The soft mechanical sounds of the transfusion unit, the ambient noise of a building settling in the cold, Minjae's own breathing, which he was keeping deliberate and steady. He watched his father's face. Sung-ho looked at the middle distance. Not at Min-jae, not at the equipment, at some point in the room that had nothing in it. The particular gaze of a man who has made his own calculation and arrived at a position he can hold. 4 minutes passed. Sung-ho's breathing changed. It was not sudden. It was a gradual shift, a deepening difficulty, the body's response to something moving through it that was working faster than it should have because the condition had already compromised the clotting system. Min-jae's hand went to the valve, closed it. Sung-ho looked at him. "Min-jae," he said. "I'm here," Min-jae said. Sung-ho's hands moved in his lap. That small, involuntary motion, but different now. The motion of something trying to hold on rather than manage pain. He looked at his son with the entirely awake eyes that had refused to participate in the body's decline and were refusing still, right up to the end, to look away from what was in front of them. "The organization," he said. His voice was thin now. "The legitimate transition. Finish it." "I was going to," Min-jae said. "I know." A pause. The breath was very difficult now. "She'll finish her degree." Min-jae looked at him. "The woman." Sung-ho's eyes were still on him. "She'll go back." "That's her choice," Min-jae said. Something moved through Sung-ho's expression. Something that was not quite remorse, because remorse required a different kind of architecture than the one his father had ever built in himself, but was in the territory adjacent to it, the closest he had. "I wasn't capable," Sung-ho said, "of being different than I was." Min-jae held his father's gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was both true and kind, and he was not going to lie to him at this distance. Not now. Sung-ho's eyes went quiet. Not closed. They stayed open, which Min-jae had not expected and had to hold. The fact of his father's open eyes at the end of it, still carrying that complete wakefulness right up to the moment it wasn't there anymore. Min-jae reached forward and closed them with 2 fingers. He sat with his father for 3 minutes. Not in grief exactly. It was more complex than grief, a thing that had too many layers for any single name. Then he stood up, disconnected the transfusion equipment, and walked to the vault room door. He opened it. Dae-jung was in the corridor. He looked at Min-jae's face and read it the way he had been reading it for 11 years. "It's done," Min-jae said. Dae-jung nodded. "Where's Amara?" "Secondary entrance. I called her when you came out." Min-jae moved toward the stairs. His arm was beginning to reassert itself now that the adrenaline of the vault room was receding. A deep, pulling ache that ran from the sutured wound up into his shoulder and had opinions about the direction he was moving. He ignored the opinions and kept moving. He came through the secondary entrance into the cold. Amara was there. She looked at him, at his arm, at his face. She did the assessment he'd seen her do before, fast, comprehensive, the kind of read that was medical and also something beyond medical. "He's gone," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She absorbed this. She did not say she was sorry, which was the right choice, the choice that understood the full complexity of what sorry would mean in this specific context. She was quiet for a moment, her breath visible in the cold air, and then she said, "You need to get the arm looked at again. I know Han is somewhere, I'm saying now. You've been moving on it for 2 hours and the sutures are under stress and I can see the wrap is bleeding through." She stepped toward him and did not ask permission. She took his arm and looked at the wrap in the available light from the street and made the tight, focused expression of someone assessing damage with no good options. "It'll hold," Min-jae said. "It'll hold if you stop moving dramatically through large buildings," she said, "which I'm going to assume is not immediately on your agenda." He looked at her. She looked at him. They were standing in a cold street in lower Manhattan at 1 in the morning with blood on both of them and the weight of the last 4 days distributed across every surface of the space between them, and she was holding his arm and making the expression she made when she was refusing to feel the full extent of something until the moment required it. "Cole?" she said. "Still in Long Island City," Min-jae said. "Dae-jung will turn him over to a federal contact by morning. Anonymous tip plus a substantial evidence package. SEO has been building it for the last 2 hours. And the people from Walker Street. Medical care tonight. SEO has identified family contacts for 3 of them. The others, there's a facility I fund. Legitimate. It handles rehabilitation and housing for people coming out of trafficking situations." He paused. "It'll handle them properly. She absorbed all of this. You already had the facility, she said. Yes. Before tonight. I established it 2 years ago. He held her gaze. I've been trying to clean this up for 8 years, Amara. Not successfully, clearly, but trying. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. The cold was settling in properly now. The deep kind. The kind that got into joints and made everything stiff. She was still holding his arm. He didn't move it. Medical school, he said. She looked at him. What? Columbia. Your program. I have... He stopped. I know people there. I can make a call when you're ready. Ensure there are no procedural obstacles to returning. She was quiet for a moment. That's not something I need your help with. I know. I'm offering it anyway. She held his gaze. I'll think about it, she said, which was not the rejection it could have been. They stood in the cold a moment longer. Then she let go of his arm and looked at the street. Take me somewhere warm, she said, and get Han to look at this properly. And then, she paused. Then I need to sleep for about 48 hours. That's medically appropriate, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. 6 months later. The Columbia University Medical Center was a different kind of cold than January streets, climate-controlled, institutional, the precise temperature of a building that managed human bodies and understood that temperature mattered. Amara moved through it with the particular ease of someone returning to a space their body remembered, the muscle memory of 3 years of halls and stairs and specific elevator banks activating without instruction. She was thinner than she'd been before. She probably would be for a while yet. Her left arm, under the white coat sleeve, had faint scarring at the antecubital fossa that she'd stopped covering with long sleeves 3 weeks ago. On her face, the brand caught the fluorescent light the way scar tissue does. Slightly different texture, slightly different sheen. She had stopped turning away from mirrors. She had not stopped thinking about the 19-year-old girl in the extraction room, the 2 years, the things that couldn't be given back. She thought about her every day. She had decided that was appropriate, that some things should not be put down. Reeves had cooperated fully with the federal investigation, had provided documentation, protocol records, client communication logs that traced the financial chain up through the shell structures SEO had already frozen, confirming the connection to Sung Ho's holding entities, and through them, to payments that had moved through accounts adjacent to Min Jae's organization. The federal case was complex and was going to take years to fully adjudicate. Amara had given her testimony in February in a room with a federal prosecutor and 2 investigators and a victim advocate who kept offering her water. She had told them everything, all of it, the smell of the facility, the rotation schedule, the names of guards she'd learned by listening to them call to each other across shifts, the specific face of the man who had applied the brand, who had since been identified and was in custody in New Jersey. She told them about the medical protocols Reeves had designed and about the financial payments she'd observed changing hands, and about the night she'd been moved from one location to the other in a windowless van, and she told them all of it in the flat, organized delivery of someone who had decided that the most useful thing she could do with her memory was make it into evidence. After the testimony, in the parking garage, she had sat in her car for 20 minutes and then cried for the first time since Grand Central. Not long. Not the kind of crying that has a narrative arc, just the specific release of someone whose body had been waiting for the correct moment and had finally identified it. Then she had driven home and eaten dinner and gone to sleep. Cole was facing federal trafficking conspiracy charges, along with 7 other law enforcement personnel the investigation had identified across 3 different precincts. The trial dates were not yet set. Amara's attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, who worked for a legal nonprofit specializing in trafficking cases and who had reached out to Amara through the facility Min Jae funded, had told her to expect to testify again. Amara had said she understood. The 11 other surviving victims from Walker Street were in various stages of recovery. 2 had gone home to family in other states. 3 were in the rehabilitation facility. The others were working through whatever working through looked like for them, individually, in the particular private ways that healing operated. Amara had exchanged contact information with 4 of them. She called one of them, a woman named Diane, who had been the first person she disconnected from the extraction equipment that night, every Sunday evening. She was on the clinical floor now, chart in hand, moving toward the nursing station. Third-year rotation, post-interruption. Her advisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, the one who had told her 8 years ago that she had the most disciplined analytical mind he'd seen in 15 years, had handled her reinstatement with a directness she appreciated. He had not made it sentimental. He had said, "You pick up where you left off, we handle the administrative piece. You talk to student health once, and that's the requirement." She had said thank you. He had said, "Don't thank me, you were one of my best students. This department needs you to finish." She had almost argued with him again. She had not. Minji called her on a Thursday evening in June. She was in her apartment, the new one, 2 rooms in Washington Heights. Nothing like the penthouse furniture she'd bought herself from a place on 181st Street that sold things that had been other people's first. She had found she liked that, furniture with previous lives. He called at 7:15. She answered on the 3rd ring. "How's the arm?" she said. "Functional," he said. There was a pause. "How's the rotation?" "Cardiology. I like it more than I expected." "Good." They were quiet for a moment. They had spoken 4 times since January, twice in February around the federal testimony, once in April about logistics related to the foundation, once in May because he'd called and she'd answered and they'd talked for 40 minutes about nothing specific, and she'd spent 10 minutes after the call figuring out why she didn't mind that. "The foundation," he said. "The board approved the expansion, 3 additional cities, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles." "That's good," she said. "I'd like you to be involved, in whatever capacity makes sense with your schedule. Medical advisory. You don't have to be on the board. I know that's not—" "Minjae." He stopped. "Ask me what you're actually calling to ask me," she said. A pause. "I'm going to be in New York next week," he said. "I've been in Seoul for the last 2 months dealing with the transition of the Korean assets. I'll be back Tuesday." "Okay," she said. "I'd like to have dinner," he said. "If you want to." She looked at the window of her apartment. Late June, the city outside had that particular summer quality, the heat off the pavement, the extended light, the way New York seemed to temporarily become a different city in the warm months, less defended, slightly more willing to be looked at. "Tuesday," she said. "I'm free after 7. 7:30, he said. "I'll make a reservation." "Nothing expensive?" she said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it." She could hear in his voice the thing she'd first heard when he sat in the chair in the corner of her room at the penthouse. Not warmth exactly, because Minjai's warmth operated below the frequency where most people registered it, but its presence, its specific texture. Somewhere reasonable. "Somewhere I can wear scrubs if I'm late getting out," she said. "Done." She was quiet for a moment. "The transition," she said. "It's actually happening." "It's happening," he said. "Slower than I want, but it's happening." "And the organization?" "Smaller every month," he said. "Legitimately." A pause. "It will take time. There are people inside it who've known nothing else. Finding them other things takes time." "But you're doing it." "Yes." He said it simply without performance. The way he said most things, she had come to understand. The directness was not coldness. It was the way someone communicated when they had spent enough time in spaces where indirectness was a weapon and had decided to stop using it. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday," he confirmed. She ended the call and sat for a moment in her apartment with the summer noise coming through the window and the chart she'd brought home sitting on the table and the faint, permanent scarring on her left arm catching the evening light. She picked up the chart, read 3 pages, set it down. She looked at the window, at the city outside it, which had swallowed her and spit her back out and continued existing regardless, the way cities did. She thought about Grand Central Terminal, the marble floor, the opal clock, the broken-wheeled mop bucket, the specific cold of the marble against her cheek when she went down, and the way she'd thought, without particular feeling, that it was probably the end. She thought about the arms that had lifted her off that floor, about a voice saying, "You're not going back." She had not cried again since February. She had not been certain this was healthy. She had mentioned it to the therapist she'd started seeing in March, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who worked out of a practice in Harlem and had a very specific understanding of what it meant to survive institutional violence. And Dr. Okafor had said, "Your nervous system is deciding the pace. Don't fight the pace." She had stopped fighting the pace. On a Tuesday evening in late June at 7:43, Min Jae was standing outside a restaurant on the Upper West Side when a cab pulled up and Amara Brooks got out of it. She was not in scrubs. She had been on time. She was wearing her own clothes, which meant clothes she'd bought in the last 6 months. She'd told him once, when they spoke in April, that she'd spent 8 months in borrowed things and was now only wearing things that were specifically hers, which he'd understood without her explaining further. Dark jacket. Her hair pulled back. The brand on her face was visible in the way it was always visible, the way she'd stopped modifying her appearance to address it, the way she had decided it was part of her face and her face was hers. She looked at him. He looked at her. He was thinner than January too, she noted. The Seoul months had been long. The arm had healed correctly. She'd made him send her Hans notes, which he'd done without comment. I was wearing a suit without a tie, which she took to mean he was trying to calibrate the evening appropriately, which she found, without quite intending to, affecting. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time," he said. "You were 2 minutes early in January," she said. "When you came to the testimony, I saw you in the hallway at 7:58. It was scheduled for 8. He looked at her. "You didn't say anything." "I wasn't going to wave at you through the Federal Building hallway, Min Jae." He held the door. She went in. The restaurant was reasonable. She'd been prepared to argue if it wasn't, and noted with something between relief and mild disappointment that the argument wasn't required. They sat at a table near the window. The evening light was doing what June evening light did in New York, gold and horizontal, coming through the buildings at an angle, making everything briefly look like something worth keeping. They ordered. They talked. Not about the investigation, not about Walker Street, not about any of the things that existed between them as weight. They talked about cardiology, and about Seoul, and about the Foundation's Chicago expansion, and about a book she'd read in April that she'd mentioned in passing on the phone in May, and he had apparently also read since then. They talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, on the sidewalk outside, the evening had gone dark, and the city had moved into its nighttime register, the lights, the traffic, the specific density of a New York summer night. She turned to him. "I'm not where I was," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not the person who fell on the floor in January. I'm not that far gone anymore." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it because I want it to be clear. Whatever this is," she gestured briefly between them. "I'm coming into it from a standing position, not from the floor." He looked at her. "I know that too." "Then I need you to say what you actually mean," she said. "Not logistics, not the Foundation. What you mean." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved around them. "I think about you," he said, "more than I account for. More than is explained by the situation or the Foundation or any of the practical reasons that justify it." He held her gaze in the direct way that was, she had come to understand, not coldness but its opposite, the complete absence of performance. "I think about you because you are a specific person who I want to know more of. That's what I mean." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She put her hand out. Not a gesture of formality, something more specific, more deliberate, the gesture of a person who has decided that the way you take hold of the thing you want is by actually reaching for it. He took her hand. They stood on the sidewalk in the late June dark, with the city around them and her hand in his, and neither of them said anything for a while, because some things don't need to be said to be complete. The opal clock in Grand Central Terminal, 40 blocks south, kept its 4 faces pointed in 4 directions. It did not know about the floor beneath it where a woman had gone down in January and been lifted before she finished falling. It kept time the way it always had, indifferent, relentless, valuable, beyond anyone's ability to agree on an exact number. But the woman who had lain beneath it was standing now. She had been standing for 6 months. She was going to keep standing. That was enough. That was, in the end, the only thing that had ever needed to be true. And about the night she'd been moved from one location to the other in a windowless van, and she told them all of it in the flat, organized delivery of someone who had decided that the most useful thing she could do with her memory was make it into evidence. After the testimony, in the parking garage, she had sat in her car for 20 minutes and then cried for the first time since Grand Central. Not long. Not the kind of crying that has a narrative arc, just the specific release of someone whose body had been waiting for the correct moment and had finally identified it. Then she had driven home and eaten dinner and gone to sleep. Cole was facing federal trafficking conspiracy charges, along with 7 other law enforcement personnel the investigation had identified across 3 different precincts. The trial dates were not yet set. Amara's attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, who worked for a legal nonprofit specializing in trafficking cases and who had reached out to Amara through the facility Minjai funded, had told her to expect to testify again. Amara had said she understood. The 11 other surviving victims from Walker Street were in various stages of recovery. 2 had gone home to family in other states. 3 were in the rehabilitation facility. The others were working through whatever working through looked like for them, individually, in the particular private ways that healing operated. Amara had exchanged contact information with 4 of them. She called one of them, a woman named Diane, who had been the first person she disconnected from the extraction equipment that night, every Sunday evening. She was on the clinical floor now, chart in hand, moving toward the nursing station. 3rd-year rotation, post-interruption. Her advisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, the one who had told her 8 years ago that she had the most disciplined analytical mind he'd seen in 15 years, had handled her reinstatement with a directness she appreciated. He had not made it sentimental. He had said, "You pick up where you left off, we handle the administrative piece. You talk to student health once, and that's the requirement." She had said thank you. He had said, "Don't thank me, you were one of my best students. This department needs you to finish." She had almost argued with him again. She had not. Minji called her on a Thursday evening in June. She was in her apartment, the new one, 2 rooms in Washington Heights. Nothing like the penthouse, furniture she'd bought herself from a place on 181st Street that sold things that had been other people's first. She had found she liked that, furniture with previous lives. He called at 7:15. She answered on the 3rd ring. "How's the arm?" she said. "Functional," he said. There was a pause. "How's the rotation?" "Cardiology. I like it more than I expected." "Good." They were quiet for a moment. They had spoken 4 times since January, twice in February around the federal testimony, once in April about logistics related to the foundation, once in May because he'd called and she'd answered and they'd talked for 40 minutes about nothing specific, and she'd spent 10 minutes after the call figuring out why she didn't mind that. "The foundation," he said. "The board approved the expansion, 3 additional cities, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles." "That's good," she said. "I'd like you to be involved, in whatever capacity makes sense with your schedule. Medical advisory. You don't have to be on the board. I know that's not—" "Minjay." He stopped. "Ask me what you're actually calling to ask me," she said. A pause. "I'm going to be in New York next week," he said. "I've been in Seoul for the last 2 months dealing with the transition of the Korean assets. I'll be back Tuesday." "Okay," she said. "I'd like to have dinner," he said. "If you want to." She looked at the window of her apartment. Late June, the city outside had that particular summer quality, the heat off the pavement, the extended light, the way New York seemed to temporarily become a different city in the warm months, less defended, slightly more willing to be looked at. "Tuesday," she said. "I'm free after 7. 7:30, he said. "I'll make a reservation." "Nothing expensive?" she said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it." She could hear in his voice the thing she'd first heard when he sat in the chair in the corner of her room at the penthouse. Not warmth exactly, because Minjai's warmth operated below the frequency where most people registered it, but its presence, its specific texture, somewhere reasonable. "Somewhere I can wear scrubs if I'm late getting out," she said. "Done." She was quiet for a moment. "The transition," she said. "It's actually happening." "It's happening," he said. "Slower than I want, but it's happening." "And the organization?" "Smaller every month," he said. "Legitimately." A pause. "It will take time. There are people inside it who've known nothing else. Finding them other things takes time." "But you're doing it." "Yes." He said it simply without performance. The way he said most things, she had come to understand. The directness was not coldness. It was the way someone communicated when they had spent enough time in spaces where indirectness was a weapon and had decided to stop using it. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday," he confirmed. She ended the call and sat for a moment in her apartment with the summer noise coming through the window and the chart she'd brought home sitting on the table and the faint, permanent scarring on her left arm catching the evening light. She picked up the chart. Read 3 pages, set it down. She looked at the window, at the city outside it, which had swallowed her and spit her back out, and continued existing regardless, the way cities did. She thought about Grand Central Terminal, the marble floor, the opal clock, the broken-wheeled mop bucket, the specific cold of the marble against her cheek when she went down, and the way she'd thought, without particular feeling, that it was probably the end. She thought about the arms that had lifted her off that floor, about a voice saying, "You're not going back." She had not cried again since February. She had not been certain this was healthy. She had mentioned it to the therapist she'd started seeing in March, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who worked out of a practice in Harlem and had a very specific understanding of what it meant to survive institutional violence. And Dr. Okafor had said, "Your nervous system is deciding the pace. Don't fight the pace." She had stopped fighting the pace. On a Tuesday evening in late June at 7:43, Min Jae was standing outside a restaurant on the Upper West Side when a cab pulled up and Amara Brooks got out of it. She was not in scrubs. She had been on time. She was wearing her own clothes, which meant clothes she'd bought in the last 6 months. She'd told him once, when they spoke in April, that she'd spent 8 months in borrowed things and was now only wearing things that were specifically hers, which he'd understood without her explaining further. Dark jacket. Her hair pulled back. The brand on her face was visible in the way it was always visible, the way she'd stopped modifying her appearance to address it, the way she had decided it was part of her face and her face was hers. She looked at him. He looked at her. He was thinner than January too, she noted. The Seoul months had been long. The arm had healed correctly. She'd made him send her Han's notes, which he'd done without comment. I was wearing a suit without a tie, which she took to mean he was trying to calibrate the evening appropriately, which she found, without quite intending to, affecting. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time," he said. "You were 2 minutes early in January," she said. "When you came to the testimony, I saw you in the hallway at 7:58. It was scheduled for 8. He looked at her. "You didn't say anything." "I wasn't going to wave at you through the Federal Building hallway, Min Jae." He held the door. She went in. The restaurant was reasonable. She'd been prepared to argue if it wasn't, and noted with something between relief and mild disappointment that the argument wasn't required. They sat at a table near the window. The evening light was doing what June evening light did in New York, gold and horizontal, coming through the buildings at an angle, making everything briefly look like something worth keeping. They ordered. They talked. Not about the investigation, not about Walker Street, not about any of the things that existed between them as weight. They talked about cardiology, and about soul, and about the Foundation's Chicago expansion, and about a book she'd read in April that she'd mentioned in passing on the phone in May, and he had apparently also read since then. They talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, on the sidewalk outside, the evening had gone dark, and the city had moved into its nighttime register, the lights, the traffic, the specific density of a New York summer night. She turned to him. "I'm not where I was," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not the person who fell on the floor in January. I'm not that far gone anymore." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it because I want it to be clear. Whatever this is," she gestured briefly between them. "I'm coming into it from a standing position, not from the floor." He looked at her. "I know that too." "Then I need you to say what you actually mean," she said. "Not logistics, not the Foundation. What you mean." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved around them. "I think about you," he said, "more than I account for. More than is explained by the situation or the Foundation or any of the practical reasons that justify it." He held her gaze in the direct way that was, she had come to understand, not coldness but its opposite, the complete absence of performance. "I think about you because you are a specific person who I want to know more of. That's what I mean." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She put her hand out. Not a gesture of formality, something more specific, more deliberate, the gesture of a person who has decided that the way you take hold of the thing you want is by actually reaching for it. He took her hand. They stood on the sidewalk in the late June dark, with the city around them and her hand in his, and neither of them said anything for a while, because some things don't need to be said to be complete. The opal clock in Grand Central Terminal, 40 blocks south, kept its four faces pointed in four directions. It did not know about the floor beneath it where a woman had gone down in January and been lifted before she finished falling. It kept time the way it always had, indifferent, relentless, valuable, beyond anyone's ability to agree on an exact number. But the woman who had lain beneath it was standing now. She had been standing for 6 months. She was going to keep standing. That was enough. That was, in the end, the only thing that had ever needed to be true.